The Six-Day War, fought between Israel and a coalition of Arab states, chiefly Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, from June 5 to June 10, 1967, stands as one of the most dramatic and consequential conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. In just 6 days, this war reshaped the region's geopolitical map, solidified Israel's military reputation, and set the stage for decades of tension and negotiation that continue to echo into the present, including as of March 10, 2025. To understand the war's significance, one must first look to the simmering tensions that had been building since Israel Amares, founding in 1948, a moment that sparked joy for Jews worldwide, but unleashed the Nakba, or catastrophe, for Palestinians displaced in the hundreds of thousands. The 1956 Suez Crisis had only deepened these animosities, with Israel, Britain, and France briefly occupying Egypt's Sinai Peninsula before withdrawing under global pressure, leaving a legacy of mistrust and unresolved grievances. By the mid-1960s, the region was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Palestinian Fedayeen guerrillas, often backed by Syria or operating from Jordanian-controlled territory, launched frequent raids into Israel, targeting farms, kibbutzim, and infrastructure. Israel responded with retaliatory strikes, sometimes escalating into larger skirmishes that inflamed tempers on both sides. A quieter but equally contentious issue was water. Israel's ambitious national water carrier project, which diverted Jordan River waters to its growing population, infuriated Arab states, particularly Syria, which saw it as theft of a shared resource and sponsored attacks to disrupt it. Meanwhile, Egypt, under the charismatic leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser, emerged as the standard-bearer of Arab nationalism, a movement that sought to unify the Arab world against Israel and its Western allies. Nasser's rhetoric grew increasingly belligerent, and in May 1967, he took actions that pushed the region to the brink. That month, Nasser demanded the withdrawal of United Nations peacekeepers stationed in the Sinai since 1957, a buffer that had kept Egyptian and Israeli forces apart. The UN complied, and Egyptian troops poured into the peninsula, massing along Israel's border. Then, on May 22, Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran, a narrow waterway linking the Red Sea to Israel's southern port of Eilat, to Israeli shipping. For Israel, this was more than a provocation. It was an economic chokehold, and, in its view, a casus belli, an act of war. As tensions mounted, the Cold War cast its shadow over the crisis. The Soviet Union, eager to bolster its Arab allies, supplied Egypt and Syria with weapons, and even fed Nasser exaggerated reports of Israeli troop movements along the Syrian border, though these were later proven false. The United States, Israel's chief backer, urged caution but could not deter the slide toward conflict. Across the Arab world, Nasser's defiance rallied support. Jordan's King Hussein, despite initial reluctance, signed a defense pact with Egypt, as did Syria, forming a loose but formidable coalition. Radio broadcasts from Cairo blared calls to liberate Palestine and push the Jews into the sea, words that, to Israelis, signaled an existential threat to their young nation. Faced with enemies on 3 fronts and a blockade to the south, Israel's leadership debated its options. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol and his generals, including the hawkish Moshe Dayan, who became defense minister just days before the war, concluded that waiting for an Arab first strike was too risky. Instead, they chose preemption. On the morning of June 5, 1967, the Israeli Air Force launched Operation Focus, a daring and meticulously planned assault that would define the war's outcome. At 7:45 a.m., waves of Israeli jets streaked across the skies, targeting Egyptian airfields where planes sat vulnerable on the tarmac. In under 3 hours, more than 300 Egyptian aircraft, nearly their entire air force, were reduced to smoking wrecks. Follow-up strikes crippled the air forces of Jordan, Syria, and even Iraq, which had sent token support. With the skies secured, Israel had won half the battle before most of the world even knew the war had begun. On the ground, the Israeli offensive moved with equal speed and precision. In the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip, both under Egyptian control, armored columns and infantry surged forward, exploiting the chaos left by the loss of air cover. Egyptian forces, poorly led and unprepared for the onslaught, faltered. Commanders like Ariel Sharon, already a rising star in Israel's military, outmaneuvered their opponents, capturing key positions and driving toward the Suez Canal. By June 8th, after fierce but lopsided fighting, the entire Sinai and Gaza were in Israeli hands, with Egyptian troops retreating in disarray across the canal. Meanwhile, a second front opened against Jordan. Despite warnings from Israel to stay neutral, King Hussein, pressured by his pact with Egypt and the fervor of his people, ordered artillery barrages on West Jerusalem and Israeli positions along the Green Line, the 1949 armistice boundary. Israel struck back, launching a rapid campaign into the West Bank. By June 7th, after intense urban combat, Israeli paratroopers had taken East Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Western Wall, a site of immense religious significance to Jews. The rest of the West Bank soon followed, leaving Jordan's forces reeling and a vast Palestinian population under Israeli control. The final theater was the Golan Heights, a rugged plateau in Syria overlooking northern Israel. For days, Syria had shelled Israeli settlements below, but Israel hesitated to escalate there, focusing first on Egypt and Jordan. By June 9th, with victories elsewhere assured, Dayan ordered an assault. Israeli troops scaled the steep terrain under heavy fire, capturing Syrian fortifications in a grueling two-day battle. On June 10th, as a UN-brokered ceasefire loomed, Israel secured the Golan, silencing the guns that had long threatened its northern border. That evening, the war ended as abruptly as it had begun. The aftermath was staggering. Israel's territory tripled in size, now encompassing the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights, lands that held strategic value, religious weight, and millions of Palestinians now living under occupation. The Arab coalition lay defeated, its military might shattered, and its leaders humiliated. Nasser, once the hero of the Arab world, offered to resign, though mass protests convinced him to stay. Jordan lost half its territory, and Syria's Golan defeat fueled decades of bitterness. For Israel, the victory was bittersweet. Celebrated as a miracle of survival, it also brought the burden of governing restive populations and navigating international condemnation. The UN Security Council passed Resolution 242 in November 1967, calling for Israel to withdraw from territories occupied in exchange for peace, a vague formula that satisfied no one and resolved nothing. The Six-Day War's legacy is complex. It cemented Israel's image as a regional powerhouse, capable of defeating multiple foes in a matter of days, but it also deepened the Arab-Israeli divide. The occupied territories became flashpoints for resistance, settlement, and endless negotiation, from the Camp David Accords to the Oslo process, and beyond. Palestinians, caught between occupation and exile, saw their struggle intensify, while Arab states grappled with the humiliation of defeat. As of today, March 10, 2025, the war's echoes persist in debates over borders, security, and justice, a testament to how 6 days in 1967 reshaped the Middle East for generations.